welcome everybody to our September Friday office hours in horticulture. How's everybody doing around the state?
Oh, I'm so happy that it's cooled off outside. Please tell me everybody else is too, and that nobody wants back summertime.
Absolutely.
I've been getting outside, getting up, going outside, like getting ready to leave for work. And all I really want to do is just like go to the field and work in the morning. Like I don't want to come to the office and email. I just want to like Justin go like dig a hole or tear out some weeds or like
Digging holes, I'm telling you what, it's worth that.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to host a tree walk, but I'm not digging holes. But this afternoon should be fun. We'll be out in the field. So,
Seth, do you want to start us off? I think we've been kind of swapping it up, trying to see, what section, we start with each time. But I think for today's session, let's start with fruits and vegetables. Does that sound good?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Okay, all right. And so yeah, we're just so glad that everybody's here. I think I've gotten our picture situation under control. So y'all just kick us off, and when there is a picture that goes along with whatever our question is, I will be working on getting that up there.
Perfect. Yeah, and this first one, I don't think we need a picture for this one. So Celeste, you keep getting ready and getting us going. So Greg, back me up as I go along this one. But this first question is actually from a Knox County resident. And first, let me introduce myself. I'm Seth Whitehouse. I am the Anderson County Extension Agent, so I'm real close to Knox County as well. So this is a very common question that we get, especially this time when people are thinking about maybe a fall planting, and especially as people are starting to move into our communities, really not sure which fruit trees to kind of go with. So this question is saying, hey, I'm planning on planting some fruit trees this fall. We just moved to East Tennessee. And so they're looking for possible recommendations on which fruit trees to plant. And they wanted us to be real specific with not just what type of fruit trees, but also which maybe cultivars or specific varieties. And so, I just wanted to start off by saying welcome. We're going to definitely talk about a cool program we've got in a lot of our counties called Welcome Home, which is all about Tennessee gardening, that we'll definitely plug here later on. But definitely, if this is the first time planting fruit trees, just to put the fact here that we want to start small, and maybe do some fruit trees that are a little bit easier to manage. And so the two distinguishing things here are there's pome fruits and there's stone fruits. And so those pome fruits are like our apples and pears, and then stone fruits were like peaches and plums. And so stone fruits, we kind of want to stay away from if this is our first time planting fruit trees. Just a higher level of maintenance, where peaches and plums are a little bit more susceptible to pests and diseases, and even environmental conditions where they might come out of dormancy and bloom at periods where we might have that late, April frost that might, kill our crop for that season, unfortunately. So for this Knox County resident, I would definitely maybe stick with a little lower maintenance of an apple or pome fruit like a pear or an apple tree. And definitely a great time to promote our new publication that is hot off the press, called Selecting Apples and Pears for Residential Production in Tennessee. And here you can see we've got an awesome stoplight system where green means a little bit easier to grow. Yellow says, hey, watch out, we might have a few diseases or pests pop up or maybe some other issues. And then red, where maybe we're like, stay away from this cultivar as best you can and be a little bit more selective on which cultivars. And it looks like Natalie just dropped, Dr. Baumgartner just dropped that link there for selecting apples or pears. But this person wanted to be more specific. So maybe something like a Liberty cultivar apple, Freedom, or even Enterprise are three that are that green, a little bit easier. And then last thing I wanted to say before I butcher this one to death here, but try to pick at least two cultivars where majority of our apples require two to cross-pollinate. So when those bees or other pollinators are visiting, hopefully their blooms are at or near the same time so that we have better cross-pollination, which is going to help our yield tremendously. And that's not to say that we do have self-fertilizing apples too, so make sure you read that publication. But Greg, did I hit that? Did I do that justice?
Yeah, and a couple of things I would say. So if I was going to do a peach tree, I would probably do one. And I would focus on my management of that one and really think about making certain that you get a cultivar that's got as high as chill hours as possible to delay the bloom and bud break of those trees. But those plants are so susceptible to diseases that the more plants that you put of that species in an area, the more you're going to increase the potential for disease showing up on those. So I tell homeowners, just plant one peach because they're self-fertile, and focus on your management of those.
And that chill hours, Greg, right, is 32 degrees to 45 degrees,
correct.
Right?
It's not days below freezing. It's basically above freezing up to about 45 degrees.
And I believe Contender is a cultivar of peaches that has about 1,050 chill hours, I believe. So
somewhere in that neighborhood.
Something to think about, especially when you're trying to decide if you're up on the plateau or you're down in the valley or over towards Celeste and Jackson. So,
and of course, to keep things as complicated as possible, we don't just have to memorize one good chill hour level. Those hours are literally different for the different crops that we grow, because peaches tend to be one of this earliest blooming of our fruit crops. Then the chill hour necessary to not kill off your peach bloom every year is actually higher than what would be required to not kill off your apple bloom every year. So we could get by with 500, 600, for you Western folks, maybe even a 400 chill hour apple, whereas we can't get by with that on a peach.
And
I'm so
Natalie,
glad y'all have all that information in your head. I'm heavily relying on y'all's charts that, by the way, are in the publications that I feel like you can find this information that we posted on there. So yay.
Perfect. Yep, that's the stoplight system Natalie is showing right there. And you can see the different bloom periods and what groups they're with. So definitely keep note when you're selecting your cultivars there.
So a couple other thoughts that I would have on that. So cultivar selection is going to be your most critical. Second most critical is going to be your site selection on those apples or peaches or any of those fruits. Even within a neighborhood, you could have microclimates that you could have success or failures. Stay in areas where you get good air drainage, lots of sunlight, as much soil depth as possible in your areas. So really, I can't overemphasize your planning, thinking ahead, and getting the right site. And then once you get that site selected, amending that site. And for any of these fruit crops, I'm going to tell you to probably plow as deep. If you have to lime it, get that incorporated as deep in the soil, your fertility, try and get it down as deep as 12 inches or plus, as deep as you can incorporate that. Because when you get that fruit crop in, there's the liming and any of those factors are, you're just really not going to be able to change that soil environment as much as what you possibly need to. So fail to plan to fail. So cultivar selection, site selection, and then site prep for those. And
I put this chart up here so you could see what the stoplight system looked like, but also just to say that we made these colors based on the disease resistance reported for some of our most common diseases. So fire blight, very important, the apple scab. But I'll also say that, we don't have huge orchards where we're testing all of these disease resistance, but we are starting to get more experience with them. Last winter, I was putting this publication together, looking up all the information on cultivars, getting all excited about the new cultivars. And so I just ordered way more apple trees than my partially shaded backyard can even handle. And so I can tell you that in my backyard, I have a Gallerina growing within 15 feet of a Pixie Crunch. And this difference between susceptible to rust, and less susceptible for some of those, like I can see it, right? I have not done any spraying on those trees, and my Pixie Crunch is already defoliated this year because of cedar apple rust. So, even those moderately resistant or susceptible and moderately resistant, like, there's a good chance you're going to be able to see those differences.
One thing I would add to, so with apple trees and a lot of times overlooked, and a lot of times you're just not even going to know, it's not going to be listed. But if you can do your research, look at what the root stocks are that you're growing those trees, and the root stocks are going to dictate whatever the size of that tree is. So have a little bit of an idea. A lot of people want to grow dwarf trees. That's all and fine. But understand, with a dwarf tree, you're going to have some type of support system in place. When that tree starts to mature, gets more laden with fruit, the potential for that tree to be toppled over is a real thing. And so understand you need to have some type of trellis system in place for those dwarf. And then with the semi-dwarf, the rootstock's going to dictate the different sizes of those trees and how big they will get, how vigorous they'll grow, how vigorous they'll respond to pruning, the disease resistance, etc. The other thing with an apple, think about whether it is a spur pruning versus a tip pruning. If you're in a smaller space and you're wanting to kind of keep that apple tree a little bit more compact, really try to find cultivars that are spur type apple trees that fruit on spurs. They can be kept to a smaller size than one that is a tip budding or tip blooming apple tree. They're going to continue to grow out there. They'll get bigger, and they're a little bit harder to manage. If you got plenty of size and space, that won't be an issue. And the last thing that I would tell you regarding apples and stuff, when homeowners a lot of times plant apple trees or peach trees or whatever, they try to bunch them up and they try to create this little orchard, and for commercial orchards, we give what the minimum spaces are for rows and space between plants, because we're trying to put as many trees in an acre that we can for the greatest amount of fruit production. In a home orchard, hey, open those things up to where you can get some airflow through those, some sunlight through them. You don't have to be just gaudy with space, because obviously we need that cross-pollination. But think about opening it up where you can get around them mowing or spraying or picking, but most importantly for that environmental airflow and sunlight getting to those trees.
Hey, y'all, we had a question come in on the question and answer portal that I think goes perfectly along with this conversation. It says, "Good morning from Warren County." Thank you for sending in a question. Their apple trees are starting to bloom, and they were wondering, is anybody else having this problem? And I'll say, I can't speak for fruit trees, but I've seen some ornamental woodies that are mightily confused with
Same.
what season of the year they're supposed to be in. So what are thoughts from y'all as far as fruit trees that are confused possibly? Like, why would they do that?
I've seen them. They'd be a physiological, I don't know, Natalie, from a physiology standpoint, might have a better explanation. I've seen them do it. As a matter of fact, I've got I can't remember if they're Liberty or Empire cultivars that have actually bloomed in the fall of the year for whatever reason, and then set fruit. And actually this year I probably have some of the best fruit crops on those cultivars that I've seen. So it's not out of the norm to see that occur.
Yeah, and I just put a link in the chat box. Now, this is from further north than we are, but big fruit tree production area. So Michigan has some of, the deepest bench of tree fruits specialists in the country. And it really just talks about stress. And, I know that is a general term, but I think that what we're seeing with some of those late blooming is, floral bud initiation takes place, and we're seeing some disruptions with, droughts or things like that are essentially causing stress. And instead of those blooms overwintering and blooming, next year, they're kind of getting the signal that, to bloom right now. So So I mean,
wonder, can I
yeah.
ask I'm going to have an add-on question. So if you have some, I mean, obviously it's not like a full bloom situation. It's like you're getting little blooms like here and there. So you shouldn't be worried or concerned about your crop for next spring, do you think? Like
No.
it's still going to bloom in the spring when it's supposed to?
Yes, unless it bloomed out full bloom, it
Okay.
still should bloom in the spring. And so, and Natalie talking about stress, I think the summer that mine did, it didn't have anything to do with drought. It had to do with the excess moisture and cloud cover and cooler temperatures than normal. And it was almost, it really kind of the fall kind of more mirrored a spring environment than it would a fall environment.
The trickery of nature. What is up? It's crazy. Well, okay, so good segues. We've got one more fruit question before we go into some veggie stuff. It is about blueberries, transplanting like container grown blueberries this time of year. And I think Natalie, you answered that one, correct? I'll get the picture pulled up if you want to take it from there.
Yeah. And so this, y'all are gonna be so excited. We're gonna be geeky this morning talking about physiology. But I think that this also connects with the container question because that's actually kind of a glazed or a colored terracotta pot. So we're talking about a container that's probably going to dry out relatively quickly. This is not a huge container. I'm on board with the concept of transplanting this young blueberry plant because you'll even get better growth out of it if you get a little bit more rooting area. But to get back to the geeky stuff, blueberries kind of have two periods of root growth, or I mean they grow through most of the growing season, but they're going to be two high periods of root growth. And one, is earlier in the season, and the other is after they are completely done bearing, kind of towards the end of the summer, the early part of fall. And what they like for root growth is temperatures between about 55 and 65 degrees. So when we think about the types of, and Lee Rumble's smiling because this is probably similar to what he says about trees in the fall. And so we think about the types of conditions that a container plant has experienced over the summer on a porch. It's probably had fairly warm root temperatures for several months now. And so if you get that into a larger container where there is good medium for those roots to expand to, I think that over the next few weeks, you're probably going to get a nice little flush of root growth if you repot that plant. And one thing I will say, and the Woody folks on the call can jump in if I miss anything, I would not do top pruning, right? We don't want to induce any kind of additional shoot growth. What we really want to do is push that plant to expend its energy into root growth, because as it moves into dormancy, it's going to be pulling some of those carbohydrates down from its shoot material, and that's going to be good, right? It's going to push those carbohydrates to root growth. So don't do a lot of top pruning to try to do any balancing or anything like that. Save that for for March or something, and get in some bigger pot, good medium, and let those roots go to town this fall.
And remember, with those blueberries, they are a very shallow rooting plant, and so some of the most successful of those blueberries are grown high in a soil profile and berms. They love water, but they absolutely cannot tolerate wet feet in any shape, form, or fashion. And so any environment that can get plenty of water, but that water drains away, good airflow to the root system. And of course, with blueberries, paying attention to the pH, we need the pH down that 5.2, 5.0, 4.8 range. They'll thrive.
Awesome. Good. Okay. So let's transition to some veggie questions, and we've got quite a few here. So let's just start with, this was an interesting one to me. And so I'm going to lead with that one. It's about sweet potatoes. So we had one of our gardeners send in a photo, says, not sure if this is a pest or a disease or what exactly is happening with their sweet potatoes. And I think, Bob, you answered this one originally, and so go for it. And whoever else wants to join in, and I'll pull that picture up so we can see what's going on.
Well, good morning. I'm Bob Avery from Robertson County. And this question, I can remember when I was working many years ago, someone bringing a potato into the office and thinking, oh my gosh, what is going on with this? Well, as I looked at this photo for yesterday or earlier this week, then I did some searching and found that this is probably some injury that's caused by a vole, and one that's moved into the garden space and just had a nice snack on someone's sweet potato. So it's not something, it's not a disease.
Okay.
It could have been, once upon a time too, if you've run the tiller down through the row earlier on, you might have caused that injury in the potato itself. But looking at this photo and some others that are on the internet from images around the country, then I feel pretty sure that this is a vole damage.
So again, Bob, did you say vole or mole?
Vole as in V.
Vole.
And so for y'all who answer wildlife questions, voles and late summer, early fall feeding is pretty common. They really like roots or lower stem. I mean, I've just seen awful damage on young trees and things like that. They're a challenge to control, right? I mean, do you have any suggestions for management on those?
Well, in the vegetable garden, I don't, except that it might be that you include some of those practices that we think of vole control outside the vegetable garden, and thinking of don't let the grass grow and provide a nice hiding place for these meadow mice as they move across the surface. So they don't like to be exposed themselves. So if we can limit the cover that we provide, then that will be helpful. Other suggestions?
No, that would be the first thing. Yeah, that would be the first thing I'd say, is controlling vegetation around your garden. Because, when we look at commercial orchards, that bare strip under apple trees, that's there for vole control. And so if we can do those type things and manage a border or barrier around those, it's good. University of Missouri has a good publication on trapping stations, and there are ways to design traps for those, or if you want to use a bait for those as well. And then lastly, there's the good vole catching cat or a dog. You may have a yard that looks, in a garden, it looks like somebody's been shooting 12-inch mortars off in it, but those dogs and or cats can be very effective in thinning voles out.
I'll second that, Greg. My neighbors have 3 or 4 barn cats, and they never cease to bring me a gift. And for some reason, they bring it to me and not their owners. I don't know why, but they are vole killing machines.
They know you'll appreciate it more, Justin. That's what it is.
That's exactly what it is. You got it.
Okay, moving right along. Next question. We had one come in about squash bugs, and I know it seems a little late in the season, right? Usually we're battling squash bugs, in midsummer when we're trying to get our cucurbit crops, going and keep them going, so we'll have harvest all through that season. But this question is specifically talking about they had heavy pressures with that this summer, and they're wondering if there are some strategies that they can do to help with that next year, right? Or like, is there some cleanup, some sanitation things that might go along with that? Who wants to take that one? Was it Seth?
One idea that I had about this, because we talked about how important it was for kind of cleaning up in the garden, but another one was just solarization. And this is a method that might be best done in the summer when it's a little bit hotter. And I linked that publication in there. But just removing any dead plant material and doing that end of season cleanup is always a great method. Taking it a step further and just thinking about our compost systems as well, and making sure that heats up to the correct temperature. But just applying clean mulch during the fall season as well. I've even seen these eggs overwintering and like stakes and any support or even man-made structures like hoses or other tools. But back to the solarization method, that might be a great process to, you know, remove some of these insects that are trying to pop up year after year that are overwintering. And what this does essentially is, you know, with that bare soil, we have a layer of clear plastic, and it allows that sunlight to pass through and heat up that soil, and hopefully it will trap that heat to, you know, 120 degrees or so. And so with that theory is it would hopefully remove some of our pest populations for that next season. I know this individual said that they've already done crop rotation, but it's always best to, like, our IPM, integrated pest management, is using all our tools in the toolbox. So that solarization is not the only tool we should be using, but it could supplement along with other methods too. But I don't know if anyone else has other suggestions. Of course, I could always recommend an insecticide here, but you know, talking about just end of season cleanup here.
The only thing I would add, Seth, I think it was great you mentioned IPM, because right, it's about scouting and monitoring. So if we can get out early enough to catch those eggs, it's a whole lot easier before those hatch into nymphs, and then they're mobile. So
That's right. Yep.
And they replicate so quickly. Once you've got a few, you've got a million. So good tips for fall cleanup for sure. Hey, this kind of goes right into the groove of fall cleanup. We're cleaning up from those warm season vegetable gardens. What about those folks who are considering doing fall planting for some cool season vegetables? And we did have a question come in. They said they're interested in growing some cool season vegetables, but they were afraid that they might be too late if they haven't gotten started already. We didn't have a picture to go along with this one. Thoughts, vegetable crew?
Well, if you want to grow Brussels sprouts, the ship may have sailed. But if you are into leafy greens, there's still great options. So, you know, we'll put the link in the chat. But when it comes to like beets and chard, lettuce, kale, we really look in kind of that mid-September window as being towards the end of the direct seeding. But all of those we can also harvest fairly small. So I think for those leafy crops, my comment would be, yes, there's still time, but jump in and get it done. And as we're starting to get a little bit of some of these cooler nights and cooler days, that's good for germination speed and for early growth. A couple of notes for direct seeding or for transplanting. If you can find some of the smaller head cabbage, some of those mini heads like Tierra, like Caraflex that are, you know, 40, 50-day cabbages, you might even be able to get some of those. Some of the later season broccolis that are going to be better at maturing in the cool weather. But whether you're talking about quick turn transplants or direct seed, make sure to pay attention to moisture, because everything is really dry out there, and you can kill a little lettuce very quickly. And the other thing is to not assume that whatever fertilizer you put on through the course of the season is going to be enough. Those brassicas, those lettuce, all of them are going to really require a steady supply of nitrogen so that you can get them growing quickly. Cool fall temperatures are going to increase the quality of many of those crops, but they are going to slow down the growth rate a little bit. So making sure that they're never searching for water or nutrients is going to be important to make sure that you can, you know, get them growing fast enough to mature and get a harvest.
Fall vegetable gardening has always been so tricky to me because I feel like you have to start when it's super hot. You want to, you know, get them growing and doing well, but you've always got like this thought of when's it going to be too cold for them to like keep growing. So it's just this little window that I feel like sometimes seems imaginary, but we can do it.
Don't forget season extension. You can use some very basic hoop structures and plastic that you can grow some of that stuff later and give yourself a little bit more frost protection. So don't forget that. Even if you get them out a little bit late, you can extend the season with a little bit of effort.
And that's especially great for leafy crops that aren't real tall, right? Broccoli, Brussels sprouts, things like that can be a challenge to get grow covers or low tunnels or things like that on. But especially if you got a raised bed, Agribon goes over that really easily. So it can be a great way to extend your season, even with a mid-September or early October planting with some of those crops. And many of them are, pretty hardy. You can harvest through December a lot of times, or the hardiest will over winter. So by all means.
I saw Dr. Baumgartner traveling 2 weeks ago with a little bitty mini micro greenhouse, so it can be done.
For sure. For sure. All right. Good deal, y'all. So this is a nice transition question to kind of move us from fruit and veggies over to talking about some of our ornamental questions that came in this month. It has to do with soil. And this question actually came in last month and we answered it, but we didn't have time to feature it in the show. And so I just wanted to talk about it for a minute. The question says, they're asking about reusing soil from like a container, right? And how to sterilize it. And so I will start with, well, Bob answered it for this time, but I answered it last time. And I think the original question was really focusing on soil sterilization. And I will say there is no good way for doing soil sterilization, like for a homeowner type kind of level, right? So yes, on a large scale, it can be heated, to kill disease and things of this nature, but there's just no practical method for that to be accomplished through a homeowner type kind of situation. Don't put it in your oven. Don't try to cook it, on top of your stove. If you're concerned with disease and things being residual in that potting media, start afresh, right? And then I think the way that Bob was leaning when he answered the question was kind of along those same lines, right? So if you've not had issues with insects, disease, fungal issues, then there's nothing wrong with continuing to reuse that media. And there are publications out there referencing this. I will speak from personal experience, just in my mixed containers. I like to refresh that media in my large containers year after year, but I don't always completely replace it, right? And then obviously you've got to keep the nutrients to that media, because that's not going to last forever either. Does that kind of sum up your answer and mine together, you think, Bob?
Yeah, I think so, Celeste. And I tell you, I was a little bit surprised at what I found from other land grant universities and saying, well, if you haven't had any issues with weeds or disease, especially root diseases or insect pests for what you had growing in the pot to start with, we can feel pretty comfortable in reusing that material. And if you wanted to go towards solarization, then one suggestion at one site was to put it out there on the surface somewhere, do some solarization and let that take care of it. Don't put it in your oven. You're going to end up with a earthy smell.
I know that's the first thing that's going to come up if a person Googles it. It's going to try to tell you to take your soil and put it in a pan and put it in your oven. And we're telling you not to do that, please.